Thank you, Chris, and thank you for your support. Without you, I don't know that I could have ever got out to the public the message about what happened to me and what happened to my family, because some areas of the media were not interested, because they love an ICAC, they love the ability by an executive or part of the executive to destroy people without any of the things that we have here in the rule of law. And I'll come to them in a minute, but to my right is a friend of mine, a friend who didn't seek me out, I sought him out, Mr. Charif Kazal, an independent, a private businessman, never a public servant, but who has been targeted most cruelly by the New South Wales ICAC. When it happened to me, I knew that there were other victims who may not have had the resources that I had to get justice. Not, of course, that anyone's ever apologised to me. Mr. Kazal is still named as corrupt by New South Wales ICAC. He was a private citizen. That's not the sort of person that is supposed to come into the bailiwick of an ICAC body, of a corruption commission. It's supposed to be public servants or politicians. So just beware of that if ever you think that it might be a good thing. If it can come after a fine man like Charif Kazal, a member of a family who came to this country over 30 years ago and who all worked very hard to establish businesses in our community, who are fine Australians whose family and members of the extended family have joined the armed forces, who have done many fine things as Australians in this country. But Charif is a successful businessman, and he was targeted, it seems to me, in part due to racism. And I don't say that lightly. And one of the reasons I believe it more strongly is that I even knew a person who worked at ICAC at the time who said, oh, well, people like that, people of that name or that background, that they're all crook. They couldn't have made that much money honestly, so who cares? I know that happened because I've spoken to that person, and that also represented, I believe, the views of the very higher ups in ICAC at the time. And Mr. Kazal has suffered dreadfully, and he's still named as corrupt on the ICAC website, even though ICAC tried 5 times to get the DPP to charge him. And the DPP, not loath to charge people, if there's a bit of a chance, and getting worse, I must say, having left them 4 years ago. But going back to 10 years ago, the DPP, very, very wisely and in circumstances of being fully briefed, said no. And the commissioner kept going back and saying, no, you've got to charge him. Just charge him. Don't charge the public servant who may be involved. Just charge him. And it was so dreadful because the commissioner later, the inspector, acting inspector Nicholson, who was a very fine judge, had been a judge of the district court, wrote a report, one of only 2 in existence really, that that shows what was going on in that Latham era of ICAC, where people were targeted, scalps were sought, and evidence was gathered if it could be, but it didn't matter if it wasn't, because it was too late. By the time your reputation is traduced in the public and you're dragged through that walk of shame, there's no coming back. I could come back. I'm a lawyer now for 40 years. In this room, 45 years ago, I was sworn in as a Justice of the Peace in 1977, and I was with a few of my mates from the Attorney General's ministerial office, and we stopped at the Metropole for a couple of schooners on the way back because we thought they'll never know. And anyway, we're Justice of the Peace now. But that was probably one of the more corrupt things I did, not having anything to do. having nothing to do with some girl's car accident that I wasn't at, and neither was my son, and she was found to be have no alcohol in her system. That was my story. And if ICAC had done one bit of investigation, like asking the police, was she tested, they would have found out yes she was, and there was no case. Look what that cost you as taxpayers. That was okay for me, because I could come back as a barrister. Well, I stayed as a prosecutor, came back as a barrister, and now my clients think I'm a hard fighter, and I've got no end of work.
You are a hard fighter.
Mr. Kazal is not in that category because he's a businessman and he's tainted. He's tainted. And so may I just ask you...
Please go ahead.
This.
And thank you for this fine introduction, and thank you, Chris and Sally, for putting this on tonight. I'm very grateful of being invited to be here to at least speak to your guest about my experience, and I hope that no one will ever go through what I have been through ever again.
Could you tell us, it was in 2010, wasn't it, Charif, that you found yourself all over the Sydney Morning Herald?
Yes, well, it's like you have dinner, you have a glass of wine, and you go to bed thinking life is normal. 1 September 2010, I woke up to front page news article about me and my family supposedly have acquired leases in the rocks corruptly, through offering some benefits to a particular public servant that was dragged into this saga, Mr. Andrew Kelly. And these allegations were all false. They were not true, and they were perpetrated by a former business partner whom at the time I had fallen out with due to a business dispute, and I had a court case on foot against him for breaching his fiduciary duty with respect to control of the company, where my shareholding was reduced to 0.01 from 50% holding in that company, which controlled 80% of one of the largest waste facilities in New South Wales.
And in short, this fellow has been found to be a crook since, and a con man.
Well, he has findings against him in the United States of America for breaching contracts and frauds allegations. So, put things simply, the Sydney Morning Herald somehow went to print without even contacting me or asking my side of the story, or offering any explanation, and the allegations were so false and so ridiculous. Like, it was just, you could not believe this, because my family through a very long period of time had acquired their leases and businesses through proper means, paid for them, and managed those businesses, different parts of my family. I wasn't one of the business owners, I just happened to be consulting for the family business at the time. So I'm a private citizen, going on about my business, and suddenly I'm splashed all over the newspapers along with every member of my family, every brother I had. And it was like photos that were just laid out like mugshots. And what's so upsetting is no one had attempted to contact any of us or ask any question. But then the drama continues, where we find ourselves being called into, hearings at ICAC, private hearings. Now all these allegations are being made, and when you put your voice forward and you say, what's going on, why am I here, what have I done wrong, you get bullied, you get abused, you sit here, you answer questions, it's like, what am I doing here, what have I done wrong, please tell me. There's no, like anything that someone could tell you've done anything wrong, they just bully you, they use the power that they've got. It's not like the ranger going after me for a parking ticket. This is a powerful organisation that has so much power, and that power has immense, pressure on anyone, and they could ruin anyone's life like that. And they're using this power wrongfully, and they're abusing their position. At the end of it, we end up having an inquiry on the 25th of July 2011, where they went into a full public inquiry. At the end of it, all my family leases were found to be obtained properly. There was never any wrongdoing with any of the leases or any of the allegations that were leveled against me or my family. It did not exist. In fact, ICAC took that former business partner as a star witness against me. He has, under oath, he confirmed he was the informant to the Sydney Morning Herald. He gave him the cropped photo, which he was in the middle of that cropped photo. He cut himself out, just left me and the public servant, and they went for it. And after all of this, what ICAC has done to me should alarm everyone in this room. I have been labelled corrupt and published on the ICAC website because I could have done something wrong. Those in power at the time, the late Commissioner David Ip, should have known better as a former Supreme Court judge in Western Australia and on the Court of Appeal New South Wales, that you could not have mounted that finding because there was a case law relating to the former Premier Nick Greiner in 1992 that the could test, it would have to be would proven, not could do, and it has to be evidence of corruption. So there was no evidence of any corruption. He mounted that finding on me and labelled me and hung me out to dry without any mechanism of me of being able to clear my name or have my day in court. And this is like extremely devastating for me and my family. I have to live for the last 12 years to try to fight to clear my name. I was wronged. I'm a believer of pursuing my rights and my justice. And Margaret might want to ask me more questions, but
One thing that we did find out when, by the time the inspector looked at this closely, was that a very important piece of evidence was kept out of your inquiry. The public servant who was in charge of the leases that Charif's family had given a statement saying, these are all fine, I approve them, not the other fellow, not Mr. Kelly. That was all my work, but that was left out of it.
In fact, this statement was obtained on the 8th of July. The inquiry, the public inquiry commenced on the 25th of July. ICAC withheld this information, very crucial information, very detailed information, exculpatory, evidence that they've never disclosed it to me or my lawyers, because I would then have had the ability to go to court and stop this or inject this whole proceedings. And I only found out about this evidence years later when Mr. Kelly was going through his defamation case and contacted Mr. Paul Nielsen, who gave the statement to the Commission. And Mr. Nielsen said, why don't you use my ICAC statement? He said, what ICAC statement? And there it went.
He hadn't been called because he would have exonerated.
Because the allegations, as the Inspector Nicholson correctly found, ICAC premise was to launch a public inquiry and waste your taxpayers' money that they're supposed to be guarding and protecting and doing their jobs. So they went for this based on articles published in the Sydney Morning Herald. So the Sydney Morning Herald now runs the agenda of what ICAC can do in terms of
make no mistake.
Destroying. This is true. It's all published. It's all printed. None of this is being. This is the facts that we're saying. Millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, people's lives, reputation, and livelihoods were destroyed as part of this. I'm still labelled corrupt till this day, even though 5 years ago, 28th of June 2017, Inspector Nicholson, as one of two reports, published one in Operation Hail with Margaret and her family and one in Operation Vesta, published a report to the Parliament calling for my exoneration, detailing and outlining the abuse of power, the breach of the Act that ICAC participated in, the pain and suffering and the stain on my reputation, my human rights were breached, and calling for an exoneration protocol and detailing clearly that ICAC had failed to gather any evidence of wrongdoing before, during or after the inquiry on my behalf or on Kerry's behalf. And in fact, this should never have happened. But the deaf silence that we've had to still keep waiting for till this day, I had to go through 3 premiers. Premier Baird, who I had met personally as I was a local constituent, referred me to Inspector Nicholson and told me categorically that if ICAC had done the wrong thing, they'll be held to account. Then Premier Berejiklian, many times on the Alan Jones show and others, said it will get to the bottom of it. Processes were in place to exonerate people who were wrongfully dealt with. And then we get Premier Perrottet telling myself and Margaret that the right thing will happen, and still nothing has happened. This is outrageous by every mean, that a normal private person, I'm not a politician, I'm not a public servant, I'm not under any charter of a body like ICAC.
And you receive nothing whatsoever.
I'll receive 0 benefits, 0 favours, nothing ever has been done, but the thought police, I could have done something wrong. Any of you in this room could do something wrong. Anyone could have a thought to do something wrong. But it's not the law that you could label someone as corrupt, which is as potent of calling someone a murderer, and leave them with this stain for the rest of their lives. People's name's reputation is paramount, it's important to them, and it should, bodies like ICAC should not have this power to destroy it.
So there's no appeal for Charif against this finding of corruption. So the rule of law says no one is above the law. ICAC is above the law because there's no appeal. The DPP says he's committed no crime, and they steadfastly resisted any push by ICAC to prosecute him for anything. Find something, ICAC was saying. No, there's nothing here. So ICAC's above the law. ICAC doesn't presume that you're innocent. ICAC is not open, independent and impartial because it can choose its own scalps, its own subjects. A police detective can't choose his or her own. That someone comes and makes a complaint, or the boss says, investigate this. It's not ICAC deciding who will we go for next. So that's if there's going to be a federal one, they can't choose their own targets, because that's always bound to result in a lack of objectivity, because the person is invested in it. They decide who they want to go after, and they want it to succeed. So in any future ICAC, they must be given their work by someone independent of them, because it can never work the other way. Even a royal commission, which is something similar to an ICAC because it's part of the executive and not part of the judiciary, is given terms of reference. It can't just do its own stuff and never turn up in court and be cross-examined about it. These things are dangerous, and the reason that Mr. Kazal's story is so important is that it can happen to anyone. It's not so for all the people who are nothing connected with government and say we hate corruption. Of course, we all hate corruption, just like we all hate pedophiles and we all hate terrorists, and of course we hate corruption. But I think they're short of corruption, to be perfectly honest, because now they're after pork barrelling. ICAC urges government to ban pork barrelling. Haven't they got anything to do? What happened to all the corruption there was, when now they've got to usurp an elected official to decide that, for a public servant to decide in an electorate that they shouldn't be giving money to this area, they should be giving it to this area. This is ridiculous. This is just corruption becoming more and more inclusive of anything it wants. Like from Alice in Wonderland, it means what we want it to mean. And in fact, that response was given by a barrister representing ICAC, in my case in the High Court. Corruption means what we want it to mean. He's been appointed to the bench now, so maybe he'll learn a bit of impartiality and independence. Please let that happen.
What's also important, that the government knew well and truly that ICAC has done the wrong thing. And prior to Margaret Cunneen, when I mean, I had this finding, I was like shocked, and I did everything in my power to try to clear it, fix it. I even went to court in 2013, and I was before Justice Harrison in the Supreme Court, where this court should have known of the upper court, which is the full Court of Appeal and Supreme Court, of the ICAC ruling into the Greiner case, that ICAC could not have mounted a finding on the Court test. And this judge should have known and really declared my report a nullity, or basically cleared me. In fact, took no notice. And what's worse, I learned later that this judge, he was a former ICAC assistant commissioner and failed to declare it to me and my legal team. So that's your first surprise. We go from ICAC now, it's almost the courts are caught up in this process. And then I wrote to the Parliamentary Committee in 2014 prior to Margaret's case, and no other than the current Premier was chair, Perrottet, and wrote back to me and says, no, we're satisfied with the current provisions. Only then for Margaret and her family to have the, terrible experience, and being so courageous and determined and had the resources and the legal understanding and the legal knowledge to be able to take this further, and then the highest court in the land rules that ICAC were operating beyond their legislative powers, similar to what I was calling for. What does the New South Wales government do? In a click of a finger, they introduce retrospective legislation. How could, if a policeman wrongfully draws his gun and shoots someone and kills him, does that mean they get the protection of the government retrospectively legislating that this was okay? Any establishment, organisation, government, anyone in any position of power, unless there is accountability and a redress of when something goes wrong, then we're living in a Gestapo-style era, in my view. We preach democracy, freedom of speech, all the important things that we value, the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, all those important values that we have, and we should really protect. But it seems ICAC can break any of those rules, and there's zero accountability, and the politicians are happy to allow it, and the government happy to let it happen.
There is a parliamentary committee into ICAC, and that's supposed to protect us. They ran an inquiry over the last year, and it's been no good since Malcolm Kerr was in it. Since then, it's done nothing. ICAC was fine while Mr. Kerr was the president of that parliamentary committee, but of course Charif wanted to go to give evidence to the parliamentary committee, and he was not permitted to go. He asked to go. He said, "I'm ready.
Actually, in fact, Margaret, this is a good point you raised. I wrote a very detailed submission detailing my whole experience. I mean, it's black and white. They redacted my submission, only published 5 or 6 pages of it. They minuted, someone moved minutes in the inquiry not to invite me. Well and truly knowing that there is an inspector's report which they are obliged to take into account and do their job as they are obliged to do. And the current inspector, which is about to retire soon, Mr. Bruce McClintock, was my defamation barrister at the time when I was going through all of this, and when he was asked by the government to review the ICAC Act in 2015. And I happened to be in his chambers shortly after that, and I've asked categorically, why didn't you do something about my case? And his words to me in the presence of officers of the court, that 3 cases carried grave injustice in ICAC. One was Margaret's case, Margaret Cunneen, Angela DeMoore, and my case. And I said, how could you say this? Why didn't you do something about it? His words were to me, it was not within my remit. So this is one. Secondly, he told me that my only hope was the inspector. So shortly after that, the inspector gets to review my case, publishes the report, and 5 years on, nothing. I had to go all the way to the United Nations. I engaged the services of the Honourable Jeffrey Robertson, the former Attorney General in 2019, Christian Porter, and at the Press Club, cited my case, one of an injustice and should not have happened. Quoted the inspector. The Commonwealth accepted that my reputation has been damaged. My case has been accepted at the United Nations. We've submitted the breaches in a submission to the United Nations in terms of Article 12 and 11, all the issues that were basically taken from me and my standing as a good citizen. I've done nothing wrong. There's no wrongdoing. Why do I have to live for the rest of my life being labelled just because ICAC was allowed to abuse its power, and more importantly, the government retrospectively legislating to cover it up? This is unacceptable.
The ICAC inspector says that you're not corrupt. He is above ICAC, and that finding should not stand. And yet,
it still is there.
ICAC is a law unto itself. It doesn't even listen to its inspectors. It didn't listen to mine either, or yours. It's above the law. It's out of control. It should have been shut down years ago, and no Commonwealth government should ever repeat the same mistake.
100%. I mean, for the protection of everyone in the community and in Australia and New South Wales in particular, we should fight this and stand for the citizens' right, and what you are doing is great work, because this is important. A lot of people think, oh, this can't happen to me, but let me tell you, I never thought in my life this could have happened to me, but it has happened to me. And living through it and experiencing it, and the pain and the suffering and the emotion and the stress and everything that this wills on you, it is unbearable, because you are always in defense mode. You always have to defend yourself, you have to explain yourself. It's like a monkey on your back, really. It stays there with you.
It's a tattoo on your forehead.
And it's unacceptable.
No one can, good people should never be raided by public servants who are carrying guns and no warrants.
100%.
Going through your house. That's not the police. That's not what we signed on for in a democratic society. Who are these people? They never get called to account. But someone must be called into account, and someone must expunge that stain of corruption 100%. From the name of Charif Kazal, because he is a fine man. And as I say, he didn't come to me. I went looking for him, because I was horrified at what had happened to him.
And I really appreciate it a lot. Margaret's been a great support, and Chris over the time as well. Without your support and you shining a light on this, I mean, we're still fighting, but I hope that justice will be delivered, because it's deservedly needed to be delivered. People shouldn't live like that, and I really appreciate your support, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you all, and happy to answer any questions or whatever.